सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति 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 हरि ओम। Readings from Meditation and Spiritual Life, Chapter 3, The Soul and Its Destiny. First point, the problem of problems. Faith in the pre-existence of the soul is a common feature of Hinduism, while faith in the post-existence or immortality of the soul is common to almost all the great religions of the world. In his lecture on reincarnation, Swami Vivekananda says, of the many riddles that have perplexed the intellect of man in all climes and times, the most intricate is himself. Of the myriad mysteries that have called forth his energies to struggle for solution from the very dawn of history, the most mysterious is his own nature. It is at once the most insoluble enigma and the problem of all problems. As the starting point and repository of all we know and feel and do, there never has been nor will be a time when man's own nature will cease to demand his best and foremost attention. Each generation passes on to the next this problem of the nature of the soul and its destiny, the great mystery of life and death. But fortunately, there are always a few intrepid and earnest souls who try to unravel the mystery and find a solution through self-realization. Let us make an effort, then, to follow in the footsteps of these great ones. If we try hard enough and persistently enough, we may solve the problem for ourselves. In the remarkable book, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, the little girl Topsy is asked, "Do you know who made you?" "Nobody, as I know John," says the child with a short laugh and adds, "I speak, I guess God don't think nobody never made me." Do you ever think like that? There are many grown-ups in this strange world of ours who are not at all interested in this problem. But there are also some who cannot help asking the question, where do we come from? Have we been created like the things we see around us? Did we exist before our birth in this world? And shall we continue to exist after death? Such questions have been asked again and again down the ages. In the words of Walt Whitman, the two old simple problems ever intertwined, close home, elusive, present, baffled, grappled, by each successive age, insoluble, passed on to ours today, and we pass on the same. Next point is the biological explanation. Western biologists divide the life of an individual multicellular organism, be it a fly, a bird, a beast, or man, into 5 different phases. The formation of the individual by the process called fertilization, the period of development, the period of adult stability, senescence, and death, the terminal event of the cycle. According to most biologists, the organism comes into being with all its characteristics through the process of hereditary transmission. There is no place for individual or personal immortality, which the organism may attain through its progeny or descendants. Those organisms which do not reproduce their species ultimately cease to exist. Our next point is the Hindu conception of immortality. Quite distinct from this view, there is another theory presented to us by the ancient Hindu spiritual teachers. They tell us that the physical life of every being passes through a cycle of six changes, that is, birth, existence, growth, transformation, decline, and destruction. Destruction only means death of the form of the body. By death is meant that the being ceases to exist physically but does not cease to be. Its life continues on a subtler plane, closer to the source. After a short interval, the soul is reborn in a new body. The soul is never destroyed, but its physical medium undergoes a cycle of changes. Swami Vivekananda observes, of all the theories that have been held by man about himself, that of a soul entity separate from the body and immortal has been the most widespread, and among those that held the belief in such a soul, the majority of the thoughtful had always believed also in its pre existence. From personal direct experience, the teachers of Vedanta tell us that the soul or the spiritual entity which passes through repeated embodiment is immortal in itself. It existed before its birth and will continue to live eternally, even though it may pass through a series of births and deaths. To use a modern analogy, like the spectrum, which is not merely the visible band of light, but also that which extends beyond the violet and the red rays. The soul has an infinite past and also an infinite future. The soul of man is part of an infinite existence which connects the past, the present, and the future, and transcends both time and space. The past and the future existences of the spirit are not known to us, but in reality, there is a continuum of existence. Though nobody can deny the existence of his own self, its real nature can be understood only through the power of higher intuition. The Katha Upanishad says, this self cannot be seen through physical eyes, for it is without visible form, but it can be realized in the depths of the purified heart. Those who know it become immortal. The law of karma as well as the doctrine of transmigration is applicable only to bound souls. Those people who identified themselves with their ego, mind, senses, and body. They are born again and again, but those in whom a new, higher consciousness has dawned are freed from the false identification and realizing their true nature as the infinite spirit are freed from the cycle of birth and death. They become immortal. The subtle body is born again and again in new gross bodies and gains fresher experiences. After each physical death, the subtle body may remain in the subtle worlds for a time until the time for rebirth comes a close. All this takes place according to the unknown laws of the spiritual world. Every soul has to undergo these cycles of birth and death until it realizes its real nature as the supreme, immutable, self-luminous consciousness, the Atman. The real self or Atman is neither born nor does it die. It is, as Sri Krishna says in the Gita, Aja Nityaha Saswatoyam Purana. The self is unborn, eternal, immortal, and though ancient, is ever fresh. According to Vedanta, it is Ajnana or primordial ignorance that creates the notion of bondage for the Atman, which is intrinsically ever free. This identification of the self with the not self has been there from beginningless time, and as long as it lasts, the Atman remains the finite, individualized self or the ego. and is born repeatedly. Under the spell of ignorance, man forgets his divine nature. But there comes a time in the life of every man when he begins to feel, dimly or vaguely at first, something about his spiritual nature. The soul of man wakes up, as it were, from its eternal slumber and then begins the struggle to realize its real nature. With the final dawn of higher consciousness, with the true spiritual awakening, when the soul realizes its spiritual nature and its inseparable connection with the Supreme Spirit, all karmas fall off. The cycle of birth and death stops. As Swami Vivekananda said, we too can then say, my play is done. Our next point is the law of karma in Indian thought. The doctrine of transmigration is only an extension of the law of karma. The word karma means not only action, physical and mental, but also reaction. Reaction of the mind to external stimuli. The forces generated by actions, good or bad, produce good or bad consequences which affect the doer, that is, one who performs actions in an egocentric way with a view to getting results. Thus, the law of karma is actually the law of causation. It is the great moral law which, in its individual and collective aspects, guides the destinies of individuals and society. Every action produces two kinds of results. One is the cosmic effect, which determines our future experiences, happiness or misery. The second effect of karma is individual. Every action leaves behind an impression in the mind called sanskara. Thousands of such sanskaras are stored up in our mind, which get activated again later on as tendencies or vasanas. And these subtle impressions determine the course of our future births. This is not as mysterious as we think. If we analyze our own minds, we find that many of our present thoughts had their origin in our childhood. Certain ideas and experiences received in childhood leave deep marks in our minds. As we grow, as the films of our minds are developed, we are surprised to find what an amount of pictures and ideas we have in our minds. It is like the playing back of a tape record. Very often, we forget the source of some of our tendencies, but through introspection, we can trace them to our early childhood and even to our previous births. Some of our dreams, when analyzed, give us a wealth of details about our past. Often, they point to experiences of past lives. The law of karma has got two aspects, the binding one and the freeing one. Karma, when done with egotism and attachment, binds the soul more and more. Repeated sense enjoyments make previous impressions stronger and drag the person down to the plane of birth and death. But when karma is done with detachment, as a service to the Lord or purely for the welfare of others, it leads to the liberation of the soul. Detachment of the self can be practiced either through constant self analysis and alertness or by constant self surrender to the divine. When this is done, no new impressions are created and the old ones do not become stronger. Gradually, all the previous impressions of the mind lose their sway over us. This is called the purification of the mind. This is achieved through karma. Thus, karma in itself is not bad. It is this way we do it that determines whether it binds us or not. All schools of philosophy in India, whether they are theistic or non theistic, accept the law of karma. But the real question is, has the Supreme Being or God got any connection with the working of this laws? Is there a divine will behind its operation? A story is told of the great French astronomer and mathematician Laplace, who laid the foundation of the theory of spherical harmonics. When he presented his famous book, The Celestial Mechanism, to Napoleon, the emperor asked him about the place of God in his system. The astronomer quietly replied, "Sir, I have done without that hypothesis." Well, to many scientists, God is just a hypothesis which one can dispense with. Agnosticism or atheism, ignoring or denying the existence of God, has become somewhat fashionable nowadays with a class of superficial thinkers in various fields like science, economics, politics, etc. This theory is often flaunted as modern, and many youngsters in India are taking to it more and more. Now, when we try to understand the minds of such people, we find that they are not mature or deep. They lack the earnestness or capacity to go deep down into their own minds or even to think deeply about any subject. In fact, it is not an easy thing to think deeply. This requires a disciplined mind. Most of the so called modern materialists want only to repeat the ideas of some others and follow them blindly. I am reminded of a story. A teacher was teaching arithmetic to small children. She set a problem for them to solve. "I have 12 sheep," said she. "Six of them jumped the fence and ran away. How many would be left?" Most of the boys answered, "Six." But a farmer's boy quietly said, "None would be left." When the teacher questioned him about it, the boy said, "Ma'am, you may know arithmetic, but I know the ways of sheep. Here is a lesson for us. We should not follow others blindly like sheep." As a scientist put it, for most people, the spinal cord is enough. The brain is something redundant. That means most people lead instinctive, impulsive lives. Very few people really think and consciously guide their own lives. There is nothing modern about materialism. In ancient India, we had a school of thinkers called the Charvakas. They denied the existence of God, the soul, and immortality, and held that purpose of life was gross sense enjoyment. They never seemed to have had much influence on the people. But have the old Charvakas disappeared? They are hiding in many of us who profess religion but in actual life follow the materialistic conception of life. As distinct from these superficial materialistic thinkers, we had in ancient India deep, serious philosophic minds who nevertheless denied the existence of God. At least the God we generally speak about. But they all admitted the working of the law of karma, and, with the possible exception of the Buddhists, believed in the reality and immortality of the soul. The words astika and nastika refer not to theist and atheist, but to the orthodox and the unorthodox, respectively. Astikos are those who believe in the supreme authority of the Vedas, and Nastikos are those who do not. The Buddhists and the Jains belong to the latter category. Among the Astikos, the Sankhyas and some of the Mimamsakas do not accept the existence of God. The souls, according to them, are bound by the law of karma, whose operation is inexorable. The Buddhists, on the other hand, denied the existence of the soul itself, at the same time accepting the law of karma. This landed many of them in a curious position. Human personality is, by them, compared to a chariot. The chariot consists of an aggregate of parts like the wheels, etc. And apart from these, the chariot has no independent existence. In the same way, the human body is an aggregate of many elements, which nevertheless continues to be born according to the law of karma. There is the story of an old woodcutter who was proud of his shining axe. When anybody praised the axe, the old man would beam with joy and say, "Come, my boy, I have been using it ever since I was 20, and still see how fine it looks. Only the blade has been changed 6 times, and the handle 8 times." The old man was under the impression that he was still using the same axe. The Buddhists say that the continuity of the self through a series of rebirths is a similar illusion. Having lived several years in the West, I am able to understand the religious climate better. India is the land of Vedanta, which believes in the existence of a divine power guiding the destinies of all beings. Vedanta does not believe that an unconscious law could work out the destinies of conscious living beings. There must be a conscious being, an intelligent power, who is the ultimate controller and guide of the universe. So, in the Nyaya Sutras, we find an aphorism: God is the ultimate cause because the effort of man does not always bear fruit. Of all the various systems of philosophy in India, Vedanta alone has given paramount importance to God and has triumphed and flourished. All those schools which denied the existence of God have either disappeared from its soil or have merged in the mainstream of Vedanta. We hear about gigantic machines and most intricate computers and are very much impressed by their efficient work. But we forget that there are intelligent beings who have discovered these and are operating them. In the same way, though this infinite and mysterious universe seems to be going all by itself, it is guided by a cosmic being who is of the nature of supreme intelligence and is immanent in all beings. You sow a seed in the ground and pour some water. The seed germinates and grows. Are we to believe that there is a personal deity, Narayana or Shiva, sitting somewhere out there in Vaikuntha or Kailasa, directing the growth of the seed? There is divinity hidden in all beings. It is this immanent divine principle that controls all the life movements. Some of the Western philosophers too speak of an immanent cosmic will. The law of karma is under the guidance of the divine will. But God Himself is beyond its control. He is ever free and ever pure, and is of the nature of supreme consciousness and bliss. Vedanta further believes that man need not always go on performing actions. Actions are to be performed only as long as the soul is not awakened to the inner reality. When the soul realizes its real nature to be the same as the divine, it too goes beyond the operation of the law of karma. It becomes free. This final freedom from the cycle of births and deaths is the goal of life, according to Vedanta. In the Mundaka Upanishad, we find a beautiful imagery illustrating this point. There are two birds of beautiful plumage dwelling on the same tree. One bird eats the fruits of the tree, some bitter, some sweet, while the other, sitting at the top of the tree, simply looks on, being perfectly unattached. After some time, the lower bird looks up, realizes its oneness with the upper bird, and stopping eating, also attains supreme peace. The lower bird stands for the jiva, the individual soul, which is bound by karma and enjoys and suffers repeatedly. But when it realizes its oneness with the Supreme Spirit, represented by the upper bird, it becomes freed from all attachments and limitations and gets established in its own glory. It is not necessary to remain bound by the law of karma and be ground by its will. There is a way to free oneself from its painful cogs. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna the direct path to free himself from the bondage of karma. Give up all your dharma and adharma and surrender yourself to me unconditionally. I will save you from all bondage. Do not grieve. That is the divine promise to mankind. All the great incarnations have given such a promise to mankind. The difficulty is to have faith in it and surrender oneself wholeheartedly to the divine. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.